Friends, I have a question for you today, as I often have for the children. And it is on the same theme as that which I spoke about with the children on prayer. But this one is a particular prayer, a specific prayer, one that you just heard read from the Gospel of Matthew. One that has been called to, as you often, probably, most likely have heard of as the Lord's Prayer. Or perhaps for those seeking not to use the language of Lord because of the challenges that that word presents, the Abba prayer. Or for those of you who are reformally Catholic, perhaps the Our Father. Or maybe even for those of you who have been coming here for a while and who actually read the titles that I put on the bulletin, in the bulletin, or the resources that I put in, on the Jesus prayer. So friends, when you consider that prayer, easier question, maybe, than what I posed to the children about prayer in general, when you think of that prayer, what comes to mind for you? What word, what image strikes? And you are invited to respond. Speak up so I can hear you and repeat. What comes to mind? What do you think of as you consider the Lord's Prayer, the Jesus prayer? You think of safety. You think of comfort. Yeah. Community. Strength. Daily sustenance. Tradition. Peace. A particular line, our trespasses will be forgiven as we forgive those against others, those of others. I'm sure there's more that is brewing, that is coming to your mind, but it's okay if you don't speak those things aloud. I wanted to share with you a few thoughts from some others. First, we're going to go way, way, way back in time to Tertullian, an early Christian author who lived about 155 CE in the Common Era, 155 in the Common Era to about 220 or so. He said that this prayer is truly a summary of the entire gospel. These few words hold the totality of the good news. More recently, John Dominic Crossan, biblical scholar whom you all have heard of, at least if you've heard me speak before, you've probably heard his name. He refers to this prayer, and I did not hear this out of your words, but it doesn't mean that it's not somewhat connected, as a revolutionary manifesto and a hymn of hope. A bit more recently, Reverend Dr. Renita Marie Green, she proclaimed in her title about this prayer that it is similar to John Dominic Crossan's understanding that this prayer is a radical manifesto for liberation and justice. So if we want to follow along with them, or even to follow in and to flesh out some of what you all shared, tradition, that's huge. Security, peace, those are big words, those are big ideas that cannot possibly be captured in one sermon. Friends, I am inviting you to explore this prayer together with me throughout this Lenten season. So where do we start? Those first words, "Our Father in heaven." I know it's hard for me to say those words because there's that whole father part that makes me bristle a little bit because I just push back and I'm like, God is not a man, right? It's like, are we just upholding patriarchy here? Well, Jesus lived in a patriarchal society. We continue to live in a patriarchal society, but some of us are trying to push against that. But let's explore that with the help of John Dominic Crossan in his book, The Greatest Prayer, that focuses on this particular prayer. Our Father. Is that an exclusive term? Well, looking at the biblical text, the broader biblical text, we can see many places where father is just kind of the lazy way of saying father and mother. It's the shorthand for saying both of your parents in here. One example I'll lift up. You all have heard of the 10 Commandments before. Honor who? Who do you honor? Do you honor your father and love your mother? Do you do something else to her? Do you obey your father and do something else to your mom? No, you honor both your father and your mother. They are held on the same regard, on the same stature here. This is one example. You can look at Proverbs especially to see again and again and again a parallelism where father is mentioned, and then in the parallel, the biblical text loves having poetic parallel. It's like kind of where you say the same thing twice, but a little bit differently, in a way that brings them into dialogue with one another, in a way that makes you think, did that first line say the exact same thing as the second line? Or is there something richer and fuller happening here? And that happens, that is found throughout the biblical text, especially as I mentioned in Proverbs, where the father is mentioned, and then in the couplet, the second half of the couplet, the mother is mentioned. So perhaps we can shift our thinking on this term of father. That perhaps referring to the divine as father here is an inclusive understanding, that it holds father and mother. But is it more than just a parent? Is God more than a parental figure in this prayer, in the scriptures, in the tradition? Well, it seems so. Again, it seems that this term, that this word father was meant to be more than a parent, one who had children. You don't just take care of your kids, but the entire household. Again, you see in the discussion of Sabbath in the Torah, where you are called to honor that day of Sabbath, that day of rest. You, in the singular, are invited and called to make sure that your sons and your daughters get rest, but not just them, but to make sure, and again, another problematic area here, those who are enslaved, both male and female, get their rest. Those who are indentured servants get their rest, both male and female. Even the livestock, making sure that they too get their rest. So this householder is one who takes care of the entire extended family, which is not solely blood relatives, but is everyone who is within the broader household. Note again, it doesn't say here, and, as you might think in a patriarchal society, it doesn't say, and make sure your wife gets to rest, right? It doesn't say that here. It says you in the singular. So, perhaps our ancestors of faith understood and practiced that men and women, that father and mother were in that position as householder. That they were responsible for the care of everyone in that extended family. So what if, as Crossan proposes, what if we understand those words, our Father, as our householder, that one who is the head of the earthly household? What might that mean for the way that we understand, that we hear, that we pray these words? That God cares for each and every one of us. That God makes sure, like you would in an earthly home, in the homes that these folks were living in, that everyone had enough. That there weren't those who were hoarding the resources of the household and those from whom they were withheld. The householder in this day, in this age, was supposed to attend especially to those who were vulnerable among them, those in that time who were poor and in need in a wealthy society. To the widows and the orphans, we hear these words over and over again, particularly in the prophets, right? To care for the poor and the needy, to care for the widow and the orphan in a patriarchal society where you still had to be connected to a man somehow for your security and for your protection and your provision. Those identified as vulnerable and in need and deserving from the householder, receiving extra care, being those, again, who are poor, those who are needy, those who are widows, those who are orphans, those who are resident aliens in a tribal society. That these folks are at much greater risk of being left behind, of being lost. If we hear of God as this sort of householder, what does that mean for us as we pray these opening words of the prayer? Well, Paul would remind us, who didn't pray this full prayer, but in multiple occasions, at multiple times, prayed that we are to pray, Abba, the Father. That this prayer identifies us as heirs of God with Christ. Not sub-heirs below Christ, but on par with Christ, that we are heirs and that we are to then inherit what? What do you inherit from your parents, from the householder? You inherit both their power, their resources, as well as their responsibility. We are called, we are invited, according to Paul, to step into that role and to be householders, to be the ones who are taking care of this global community. And in particular, to offer special care and concern for those who are vulnerable. Here today, in this time, those folks that I mentioned that are our prophets, our ancient prophets, that they identify, we can add them, right? They're still They're still the most vulnerable, some of the most vulnerable in our society. Those who are poor still are the most vulnerable in our society and need, require, and deserve great care and concern, extra care and concern. That women and children continue to need extra care and to deserve extra concern. And we don't talk about them specifically as aliens, right? We talk about folks now more as immigrants. And today, especially in this country, you are exceedingly, especially vulnerable if you're an undocumented immigrant. If you don't have a firm status in this country. And this prayer, praying these words to our Father, understood, heard as our householder, calls us, invites us, demands of us that we offer our special care and concern for them. Of course, we must. And I think here in this community, we understand that we include people who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and beyond as most vulnerable in this time and in this place. And that praying these words, our Father, calls us to what? You know, to offer special care and concern for them. That is the revolutionary portion, piece of this prayer that we do hear and we pray and we should hear and pray as something that offers us comfort. It's something that we can hold on to, right? In times of challenge, times where things seem to be spinning out of control. Oftentimes, in my own experience and that from my colleagues, when you meet with somebody who's at the end of life, they can often still recite these words of the Lord's Prayer, of the Jesus Prayer, and hold on to them, that root them, that center them, that offer them that comfort, that sense of security, that sense of peace. And these words, they challenge us. And when we proclaim them, we are rooting ourselves, choosing where we are in this world, choosing to be in alignment with the ways of a God of justice, a God of peace, a God of love, who wants each and every one of us to have an equitable share. That means we have enough. We have what we need, not only to survive, but to thrive in this world. So friends, I invite you in this time, where indeed it can seem that we are in the midst of a storm at all times, where life can seem incredibly chaotic, to hold on to the familiarity of these words and to listen, to hear, to attend to the entirety of the gospel that is included within them. To listen, to hear, and to attend to the radical, the revolutionary manifesto for liberation and for justice. To hear, to listen for, and to attend to this beautiful song of hope. To let that empower you, to let that fill you, and to inspire you to action as heirs with Christ, heirs with one another, to the tremendous power and the immense responsibility of having God as our Father, as our head of the household. Friends, I'm going to give you now a moment to reflect, a moment to listen for the divine calling to you, a moment to experience the movement of the Spirit in this place. Friends, let us be together now for a moment of meditation, of reflection. Let us be together now for a moment of pause.